May 1945. The island of Okinawa is drowning in fire. In the deep, suffocating darkness of a limestone cave, a Japanese officer draws his katana. The command echoes through the damp tunnel. Gyokusai, an honorable death. A final, suicidal Banzai charge against the advancing American machine guns. Every man is expected to tie a grenade to his chest and die for the emperor. Every single man. But in the shadows at the back of the cave stands Kenji Ozu. He is 22 years old, a medic. His hands are covered in the blood of men he couldn't save. As his comrades scream the battle cry and rush blindly into the American crossfire, Kenji does the unthinkable. He turns his back. He drops his rifle into the mud, and he runs the other way. To the Imperial Japanese Army, Kenji is the ultimate disgrace. A coward. A traitor who abandoned his brothers in their final hour. In a culture where surrender is a sin worse than death, his actions are unforgivable. But the story of Kenji Ozu is not a story of cowardice. It is the story of a man who realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do in war is to refuse to die for it. Before the world caught fire, Kenji was not a soldier. He was a medical student at Tokyo Imperial University, a quiet young man who spent his evenings reading Western literature and studying human anatomy. He was taught to preserve life at all costs. But the Empire of Japan in the 1940s had a different curriculum. The military machine needed cogs, and so the student of life was drafted into the cult of death. By the time Kenji arrived on Okinawa, the war was already lost. The Imperial Navy was destroyed. The Air Force was relying on kamikaze pilots. The defense of the island was entrusted to the 32nd Army under General Ushijima. Their mission was not to win. Their mission was to bleed the Americans for as long as possible, buying time for the mainland. The soldiers were handed the Senjinkun, the military code of honor. It contained one absolute rule. Do not live to suffer the shame of a prisoner. You fight and you die. There was no medical evacuation. There was no retreat. Kenji's reality was a nightmare. The Japanese dug into the coral limestone hills, creating a massive underground network. They lived like rats in the dark. For weeks, the American naval guns and artillery unleashed what would be known as the Typhoon of steel. Inside the caves, Kenji worked tirelessly. But he had no morphine, no anesthesia. He amputated shattered limbs while his comrades screamed, using nothing but cheap sake to sterilize his crude instruments. He watched young boys, brainwashed by propaganda, blow themselves up with anti-tank mines rather than surrender. And slowly, silently, a dangerous thought began to take root in Kenji's mind. This is not honor. This is madness. By late May, the Shuri defense line was collapsing. The American forces were relentlessly advancing, burning out the cave systems with flamethrowers and satchel charges. Kenji's unit was pushed back into a dead-end tunnel beneath Sugarloaf Hill. The stench in the cave was unimaginable. A mixture of rotting flesh, sulfur, and human waste. They had not eaten in 6 days. The water had run out. Soldiers were reduced to drinking muddy puddles mixed with the blood of their fallen brothers. Kenji sat in the corner, his medical bag completely empty. He looked around at the faces of his squad. They were boys. Farmers from Kyushu, mechanics from Osaka. Now, they were ghosts waiting to be erased. He remembered the oath he took, to do no harm, to save lives. But how do you save lives in a factory of death? How do you heal a man who is actively seeking his own destruction? The cognitive dissonance tore at Kenji's soul. He had seen officers execute their own men for taking a single step backward. The entire military apparatus was a suicide pact. And then, the moment arrived. The American troops had encircled their position. The entrance to the cave was blocked by heavy fire. Lieutenant Tanaka, a hardened veteran who believed wholeheartedly in the Emperor's divine right, stood up. His uniform was torn, his face covered in soot. He drew his sword. The blade caught the dim light of the lantern. He looked at the 40 remaining men, many of them missing limbs, bleeding out on the wet rock.
"We will not be captured by the American demons," the lieutenant announced. "We will show them the spirit of Yamato. Prepare for a glorious charge."
He was ordering heavily wounded men to crawl into machine gun fire. This was the breaking point, the moment where ideology collided with humanity. The men began to chant,
"Tenno Heika Banzai!"
"Long live the Emperor." They pulled the pins from their grenades, clutching their Arasaka rifles with trembling hands. Kenji stood paralyzed. The pressure of 1,000 years of Bushido tradition was crushing him. To run meant eternal shame. It meant his family back in Tokyo would be disgraced forever. It meant he was a coward. But as Kenji looked down, he saw Private Sato, a 19-year-old boy with a shattered leg, crying silently in the mud. Sato couldn't walk. He couldn't charge. An officer handed Sato a grenade and told him to blow himself up. In that split second, the indoctrination shattered. Kenji didn't see glory. He saw murder. Pure, senseless murder. As the lieutenant screamed the final order and the squad rushed screaming toward the blinding light of the cave entrance, Kenji dropped to his knees. He didn't draw a weapon. He grabbed Private Sato by the collar of his uniform. While the rest of his brothers ran forward into a hail of American bullets, Kenji dragged Sato backward, deeper into the pitch-black labyrinth of the caverns, away from the light, away from the honor. He pressed Sato's mouth shut, hiding in a crevice as the deafening roar of the slaughter echoed through the tunnels. Within 3 minutes, it was over. 40 men were turned into meat and bone by Browning machine guns. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. For 3 days, Kenji and the wounded private hid in the dark. They drank water dripping from the stalactites. Every time Kenji closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men he had abandoned. The guilt was absolute. He had failed his country. He had failed his ancestors. He was a coward. Eventually, American troops sweeping the caves with flashlights found them. Kenji raised his empty hands, expecting to be shot on the spot. Instead, he was given water. He was given a blanket. He was taken prisoner.
Kenji survived the war, but survival, he would soon learn, carries a heavier burden than death. In the POW camp, other Japanese prisoners shunned him. He was a deserter, a man who chose his own life over the collective sacrifice of his unit. When the war finally ended in September 1945, and the reality of 2 atomic bombs brought the empire to its knees, Kenji was repatriated to a nation in ruins. He returned to Tokyo, a ghost. He expected to be spat upon, to be treated as an outcast. He carried the heavy secret of his cowardice like a stone in his chest. But the Japan he returned to was no longer the arrogant empire that had sent him to die. It was a broken, weeping nation. A nation of widows and grieving mothers who realized that their sons had been sacrificed for a lie. One rainy afternoon, Kenji visited the mother of Private Sato, the boy he had dragged into the darkness. Sato had survived his wounds and returned home weeks earlier. When the old woman opened the door, she didn't see a coward. She fell to her knees, weeping, and kissed the muddy hands of the medic who had defied the emperor to save her only son. Kenji Ozu broke the most sacred rule of the Imperial Army. He abandoned his squad. He disobeyed a direct order. He refused to die. But as history washed away the propaganda, the truth emerged. It takes courage to charge into machine gun fire, but it takes a profound, unparalleled bravery to stand alone in the dark, look madness in the eye, and choose life. Kenji was never a coward. He was the only sane man in hell.